And it's very good. They even prove to all of Africa, to the whole world, that they're liars. And it's good. I think the young Africans and the young Burkina Faso people should stop listening to them, because they manipulated us for a long time.
Western media consistently misrepresents Africa. But what if an African leader stood up to confront Western media directly? No Western leader has ever held Western media accountable for its negative portrayals of Africa. Ibrahim Traore has boldly criticized how Western media depicts Africa, declaring his refusal to accept it under any circumstances. But what exactly has Western media done? Are there specific examples that illustrate their bias? Let's find out. Have you ever wondered about the media's true power in shaping our perceptions and beliefs? In today's media landscape, the pervasive influence of misinformation and manipulation is a pressing issue that cannot be ignored. Journalists and media professionals, who bear the noble responsibility of informing the public, often find themselves trapped in a web of deceit, spun by powerful Western interests. This troubling reality begs the question: how much of what we read and hear is truly unbiased? The narrative is becoming increasingly clear. Much of the Western media, along with their complicit counterparts in Africa, is guilty of spreading falsehoods that undermine African progress and autonomy. This isn't just speculation. It's a critical observation recently highlighted by President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso. He has shed a stark light on these manipulative practices, urging us all to be more vigilant and to champion greater self-reliance in African media. Isn't it time we started questioning the sources of our information and sought out the truth for ourselves? But let's first see what President Traore says about Western media.
Western media is not new. You're journalists. You work in the media. Do you see what we call the media lie? I think many people have understood now. Most of them are media liars. They spent their time lying, manipulating. And today, when I watch them in their reports, it's shameful, and it's very good. They even prove to all of Africa, to the whole world, that they're liars.
President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso has been vocal about the detrimental impact of Western media on Africa. One cannot overlook the egregious manipulation by Western media outlets. Reports are often skewed, facts distorted, and the truth buried under layers of bias. This practice has been shaping public perception for decades, often to the detriment of African nations. The media's role in shaping opinions and driving narratives is potent, and unfortunately, it is usually wielded irresponsibly against Africa. Traore points out several ways in which Western media misrepresents Africa, with a clear agenda to maintain outdated and harmful narratives. Western media coverage of Africa tends to heavily focus on negative stories. Poverty, conflict, and disease dominate the headlines, overshadowing the continent's positive developments and progress. This creates a skewed and one-dimensional view of Africa, painting it as a place perpetually in crisis. Such selective reporting not only distorts reality, but also undermines the continent's achievements and potential. The language and framing used in Western media reports on Africa often rely on outdated colonial and racist stereotypes. Africa is frequently depicted as a dark continent, filled with tribal savagery and helplessness. These stereotypes are remnants of a colonial past that sought to justify exploitation and domination by portraying Africans as backward and incapable of self-governance. Such portrayals are demeaning and inaccurate, and they perpetuate a narrative that continues to harm Africa's global image. Western media outlets are often accused of lacking historical and analytical context when reporting on African issues. Instead of providing nuanced analyses, they often attribute problems to vague notions of tribalism or irrationality. This shallow reporting fails to acknowledge the complex socio-political histories and contemporary realities of African nations, reducing multifaceted issues to simplistic and often misleading explanations. Western media coverage of Africa is driven more by the interests and perspectives of Western audiences and governments than by a commitment to accurate reporting. This external bias means that African stories are told through a Western lens, which often prioritizes sensationalism and geopolitical agendas over accuracy and local relevance. As a result, the true voices of Africa are marginalized, and the continent's rich diversity and achievements are overlooked. The lack of nuanced, balanced, and contextual reporting on Africa in Western media perpetuates negative stereotypes. These stereotypes do not only affect perceptions abroad, but also have tangible consequences for Africans living outside the continent. They often have to contend with prejudice and misunderstanding, as people form their views based on the distorted images portrayed by the media. This makes life more challenging for the African diaspora, who must navigate a world shaped by inaccurate and harmful portrayals of their homeland. President Ibrahim Traore highlighted the case of the Ivory Coast and its former president, Laurent Gbagbo, as a poignant example of Western media's destructive influence. Gbagbo was vilified and relentlessly portrayed as a villain and a tyrant in the eyes of the global community. The constant barrage of negative coverage was not just sporadic, but a sustained assault on his character and leadership, leading to widespread disdain and mistrust among not only Ivorians, but also the international audience. This negative portrayal was so pervasive that it shaped public opinion and international policy, contributing to Gbagbo's eventual ousting and trial. However, as the dust settled and the judicial process ran its course, the truth began to emerge. It became evident that Gbagbo was innocent of many of the severe accusations leveled against him. The charges, which had been amplified by Western media outlets, lacked substantial evidence, and the narrative of his villainy began to unravel. This revelation was not just a vindication for Gbagbo, but also a stark demonstration of the grave consequences of Western media manipulation. An innocent African leader was almost destroyed by a campaign of deceit and misinformation. The case of Laurent Gbagbo underscores how powerful media narratives can unjustly tarnish reputations, destabilize nations, and alter the course of history based on biased and often unfounded reports.
Who doesn't hate Gbagbo? Our generation. They lied so much about him. They said nonsense. They put pressure by the information. You end up hating the person. They make a model of the person to impose it in your mind. You end up hating the person. We take him to the CPI, then we say he's innocent. He's guilty of nothing. It's serious. We let Gaddafi die.
But the cases of the West portraying Africa as bad is nothing new. There are many examples here, another given by Traore before we talk about how the West shows African leaders overall. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. President Ibrahim Traore points to the case of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya as another stark example of how Western media's portrayal can lead to catastrophic consequences. Muammar Gaddafi, once depicted by Western media as a ruthless dictator, faced intense vilification that justified international intervention. This portrayal painted Gaddafi as a destabilizing force in the region, prompting military action that culminated in his violent death. However, upon closer examination, it became evident that the narrative constructed around Gaddafi was not only oversimplified, but also misleading. Western media's relentless portrayal of Gaddafi obscured the complexities of Libyan politics and the nuanced realities of his rule. Instead of presenting a balanced view that considered Gaddafi's regional influence, internal policies, and efforts toward Pan-African unity, the media focused overwhelmingly on demonizing him as a threat to global stability. This narrative, amplified by Western political agendas, justified military intervention under humanitarian pretenses, leading to Libya's descent into chaos after Gaddafi's demise. The aftermath of Gaddafi's fall revealed the dire consequences of Western media's role in shaping international perceptions. Libya, once relatively stable under Gaddafi's authoritarian rule, descended into factional violence and state fragmentation, exacerbated by external meddling. The oversimplification and distortion of Gaddafi's image by Western media contributed to a humanitarian crisis that persists today, with Libya becoming a failed state grappling with ongoing conflict, human rights abuses, and economic instability.
Here are the consequences. Dictators. They did it by their own organization. They lie, RFI, France 24, Le Monde, Young Africa. They have to do the job we ask them to do. They're not free. Many media don't live by advertising. It's false. They pay you and give you the information they want.
Now the question is how the West usually shows these African leaders. Western media often portrays African leaders in a negative light, focusing disproportionately on issues such as corruption, authoritarianism, and tribalism. These portrayals lack nuanced contextualization within the historical and political realities of African nations. For instance, while corruption may be a legitimate issue in some African countries, Western media tends to generalize this problem across the entire continent without delving into the root causes or historical factors that contribute to such challenges. This oversimplification perpetuates stereotypes of African leaders as inherently corrupt or incapable, neglecting the broader socio-economic and geopolitical contexts that shape governance. There is a prevailing perception that Western media coverage of African leaders is influenced significantly by the interests and perspectives of Western governments, corporations, and audiences. This influence often leads to a prioritization of stories that align with Western policy goals or sensationalize issues perceived as relevant to Western audiences. As a result, the coverage may overlook or downplay positive developments in African countries, or fail to provide a balanced perspective from local African viewpoints. This bias can distort public perceptions both within Africa and internationally, shaping narratives that may not accurately reflect the complexities of African governance and society.
We're in 2024. It's a game of chess. We'll see what happens. You have to get away from these media.
How ugly does this get?
In Burkina Faso, people say we attack journalists, but it's not true. We have to choose between earning our bread and loving our country. They fight for their country. It's their advantage. We have to get away from that. We see national media taking these media as reference. They cite certain newspapers as liars. They have no information. Their reporters are liars. When they want to attack a country, they paint it as they want.
In geopolitics and international relations, the concept of Pan-Africanism has often been a contentious issue between African leaders and Western powers. Pan-Africanism advocates for solidarity among African nations, economic independence, cultural unity, and the pursuit of self-determination free from external interference. This ideology poses a challenge to historical and contemporary Western hegemony in Africa, which has been characterized by colonization, exploitation of resources, and imposition of cultural norms. Leaders who openly support Pan-Africanism, such as President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, often find themselves at odds with Western governments and media. The Western perspective on Pan-Africanist leaders tends to be colored by concerns over maintaining influence, economic interests, and geopolitical stability in the region. Consequently, these leaders are sometimes portrayed negatively in Western media, with their policies and actions scrutinized through a lens that emphasizes potential threats to Western interests rather than their efforts to empower African nations. Western media coverage of Pan-Africanist leaders frequently highlights challenges such as governance issues, human rights controversies, or geopolitical tensions, while downplaying their initiatives towards regional integration and development. This selective portrayal can perpetuate stereotypes and misconceptions about these leaders, shaping global perceptions and influencing international policies toward their respective countries. Moreover, the antagonism towards Pan-Africanist leaders from the West underscores broader tensions around sovereignty, autonomy, and the legacy of colonialism. Leaders like President Traore, who advocate for Pan-African unity and self-sufficiency, are perceived as challenging the status quo that benefits Western powers, thereby attracting scrutiny and criticism from Western media outlets. Western media's reliance on official government sources and authorities in reporting on African issues has been a subject of criticism. This practice limits the diversity of perspectives presented in media coverage and reduces opportunities for independent verification of information. Official sources may have vested interests in controlling the narrative and shaping public perception in their favor, which can lead to biased reporting. Independent journalism that challenges official accounts and provides alternative viewpoints is crucial for a more balanced and accurate portrayal of African leadership and politics. The language and framing used in Western media reports on African leaders often reflect colonial-era stereotypes and biases. African leaders are frequently depicted through lenses of paternalism, portraying them as irrational, corrupt, or incapable of effective governance. Terms like tribalism and irrationality are used without contextual understanding, reinforcing outdated stereotypes that undermine African agency and perpetuate a sense of Western superiority. Such framing overlooks the diverse political histories and struggles for self-determination that characterize many African nations. Western media also tends to present Africa as a monolithic entity, overlooking the continent's diversity in culture, politics, and socio-economic development. This oversimplification leads to generalized narratives that fail to capture the complexities of individual African countries and regions. By lumping diverse nations together under broad strokes, Western media neglects the distinct challenges, achievements, and governance models that vary widely across the continent. This homogenizing of Africa perpetuates misconceptions and hinders a deeper understanding of its multifaceted realities. Apart from this, a recurring critique is Western media's failure to provide adequate historical and geopolitical context when reporting on African leaders and politics. Issues are often portrayed in isolation without considering the legacies of colonialism, the impacts of global geopolitics, or the complexities of post-colonial state-building. Historical factors such as colonial exploitation, Cold War rivalries, and contemporary global economic dynamics profoundly influence African governance and development. Ignoring these contexts leads to shallow analyses that attribute complex issues solely to internal factors like tribalism, thereby oversimplifying the challenges faced by African nations. But what are the media houses, according to Traore, that are doing propaganda? Prominent Western media outlets such as RFI, France 24, Le Monde, and Jeune Afrique are often criticized for aligning their reporting with the interests of their benefactors rather than maintaining independent journalistic integrity. These media entities, despite their global reach and influence, are frequently perceived as serving the agendas of powerful Western interests, including governments, corporations, and geopolitical alliances. The relationship between these Western media outlets and their benefactors is symbiotic, where the content disseminated is often crafted to support specific narratives favored by Western powers. But how can alignment with Western interests be traced? Western media outlets may prioritize stories that align with Western political or economic interests, shaping public perception of African nations according to these agendas. This selective reporting can amplify certain issues while downplaying others, thereby influencing international policies and public opinion. Despite professing journalistic independence, these outlets are accused of lacking critical distance from Western power structures. This can result in biased reporting that portrays African nations through a lens that reflects Western priorities, rather than presenting a balanced and nuanced view of local realities. The symbiotic relationship between Western media and powerful interests can compromise journalistic integrity. Reports may omit crucial context, rely on biased sources, or perpetuate stereotypes about African countries and leaders, thereby undermining the credibility of the information presented. The consequence of this alignment is significant for African nations. Misinformation or biased reporting can contribute to negative stereotypes, hinder international cooperation, and perpetuate misunderstandings about African political, social, and economic landscapes. This, in turn, can impact development efforts, foreign investments, and diplomatic relations. But why is the West trying to show Africa in a negative light? The portrayal of Africa in a negative light by Western media is influenced by several interconnected factors. Western media often perpetuates stereotypes and narratives that have roots in colonialism and imperialism. During the colonial era, Africa was often depicted as a primitive, backward continent needing Western intervention and civilization. These stereotypes continue to influence how Africa is portrayed today. Western countries and their media outlets often have significant economic interests in Africa, driven primarily by access to the continent's abundant natural resources and potential markets for goods and services. This economic motivation can influence how Africa is portrayed in Western media. Negative depictions of Africa, emphasizing poverty, conflict, and corruption, serve multiple purposes that align with Western economic interests. Firstly, portraying Africa as plagued by these issues can justify interventions or policies that ostensibly aim to address humanitarian concerns, but often serve to secure economic advantages for Western nations. By framing Africa as a region in perpetual need of Western assistance due to its perceived incapacity to govern or develop independently, Western powers can justify their influence and intervention under the guise of providing aid or fostering development. Moreover, the portrayal of Africa as a continent beset by problems reinforces a narrative of Western superiority and African dependency. This narrative not only justifies paternalistic attitudes, but also perpetuates the notion that African nations require Western guidance and supervision to achieve stability and prosperity. This, in turn, maintains the status quo of Western dominance and influence in African affairs.
People will understand. We're here. Maybe they'll say it's fake. Come shake my hand. Maybe they'll think it's real. At least it's not fake. They have all the technology. We don't have that level yet.
Do you think the West should stop propaganda? Why can't they show the truth? Why do they have no guts? Let us know in the comment section. Will they ever tell the world what's real without hyping the false thing? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.